Somewhere in the world right now, there's a person walking around with a secret so big that entire books, documentaries, and federal careers have been built trying to uncover it. Or maybe there isn't. Maybe that person died 50 years ago on a freezing night in a forest, alone. That's the strange thing about the man we're about to talk about. We don't just not know who he was, we don't even know if he lived or died in the very act that made him famous. On the night before Thanksgiving in 1971, a man in a neat business suit did something no one had ever gotten away with before, and no one has ever gotten away with since. He hijacked a commercial airliner, collected a fortune in cash, and then jumped out the back of the plane into a storm, into the dark, and out of history entirely. He left behind a black clip-on tie, a few cigarette butts, and a name that was never even his. D.D. Cooper. You've probably heard him framed as a folk hero, a daredevil who beat the system. But the real story is far stranger than the legend, because more than 50 years later, this case isn't cold, it's heating back up. And a parachute found in a backyard shed may be about to answer the question the FBI couldn't answer in half a century. Here's what actually happened. Here's what the evidence says, and here's why a man with no verified identity may be finally getting one. Start with the crime itself, because the details matter, and most people get them wrong. On November 24, 1971, a man walked up to the Northwest Orient Airlines counter at Portland International Airport. He was calm, unremarkable, middle-aged, wearing a dark business suit, a white shirt, and a black tie. He paid cash for a one-way ticket to Seattle under the name Dan Cooper. Because of a later press miscommunication, the world would come to know him as D.B. Cooper, and the wrong name stuck forever. Detail number one about this case: even his famous name is a mistake. He boarded Flight 305, took a seat near the rear of the plane, ordered a bourbon and soda, and lit a cigarette. Then he handed the flight attendant a note. She assumed it was a lonely businessman slipping him his number and dropped it into her purse unread. Cooper leaned over and said quietly that she should look at it. The note said he had a bomb. He opened his briefcase just enough to show her a glimpse of what looked like red sticks and wires, and then he made his demands. And this is where you see he was not acting on impulse. He wanted $200,000 in $20 bills, roughly $1.5 million in today's money. He wanted 4 parachutes, 2 main chutes, and 2 reserves. And he wanted a fuel truck standing by in Seattle to refuel the plane the moment it landed. The plane circled Seattle for 2 hours while the money and parachutes were gathered. Cooper was, by every account, courteous the entire time. Calm, polite, even considerate. When the plane landed, he exchanged all 36 passengers for the cash and the chutes, keeping only the crew. He let the innocent people go. Then he gave his final instruction: fly to Mexico City, low and slow, wheels down, flaps at 15 degrees, under 10,000 feet. Question: why would a hijacker give such absurdly specific flight instructions? Because those settings do one thing above all else. They make it possible to survive jumping out of a jet. Somewhere over the dark forests of southwestern Washington at around 8 o'clock at night in freezing rain, Cooper lowered the rear staircase of the Boeing 727, a plane specifically designed with stairs that could open in flight. With the ransom strapped to his body, he stepped off the staircase and vanished into the storm. The crew, sealed in the cockpit, felt only a slight bobbing of the aircraft. When they landed, the cabin was empty. Cooper was gone. It was, and remains, the only unsolved commercial airliner hijacking in American history. And then came the part that turned a crime into a legend. The search found nothing. The FBI launched one of the longest, most expensive investigations in its history. They codenamed it Norjak for Northwest Hijacking. They interviewed over 1,000 suspects. They dragged the forests. They searched the presumed landing zone near a small town called Ariel. And they found no parachute, no body, no briefcase, no money. Nothing. A man had leapt out of a plane into a specific patch of wilderness and simply ceased to exist. That silence is what created the myth, because when there's no body, the imagination fills in the blank. To some, Cooper became a criminal mastermind who pulled off the perfect crime and was sipping cocktails on a beach. To others, he was a doomed amateur who froze to death in the woods that same night. The FBI itself leaned towards the grim version. Their lead agent for years believed Cooper almost certainly died in the jump, badly equipped in a suit and loafers, in freezing rain, over rugged terrain, with a reserve parachute that actually was sewn shut for training and couldn't even open. For 9 years, that was the entire case, a vanishing and 2 grim ghosts, the genius and the corpse. Then in 1980, an 8-year-old boy found something that should have solved everything, and instead deepened the mystery. His name was Brian Ingram. He was on a family picnic on the banks of the Columbia River at a sandy spot called Tana Bar, smoothing out the sand to build a campfire. His hand hit something buried a few inches down. 3 deteriorating bundles of $20 bills still held together by rotting rubber bands. His family thought it might be play money. They almost threw it on the fire.
It wasn't play money. The FBI had recorded the serial numbers of every bill in Cooper's ransom. Ingram's bundles, totaling $5,800, matched exactly. It was, and still is, the only piece of Cooper's ransom ever recovered, and the FBI's first hard clue since the night he jumped. Here's the problem. Instead of answering questions, the money created new ones. Tana Bar is nowhere near Cooper's calculated landing zone. The money was found far downriver from where he should have come down, in a place no simple explanation could put it. The rubber bands were somehow still intact, which shouldn't happen after years in a river. Investigators now had 2 mysteries where before they'd had 1. What happened to Cooper, and how on earth did his money end up buried in the wrong place by the wrong river, still bundled? Over the decades, the suspects came and went. A man named Richard McCoy, who pulled off an almost identical hijacking just months later. A troubled man named Kenneth Christensen. A dying man whose niece said he confessed. The FBI tested DNA from Cooper's tie against several of them. None matched conclusively. In 2016, after 45 years, the FBI officially closed the case. Not solved, just closed. They were done. But the internet was not done, and this is where the story stops being history and becomes current events. Remember that name, Richard McCoy? Richard Floyd McCoy II was a Vietnam veteran, a skydiver, a Sunday school teacher, and, just 5 months after the Cooper hijacking, the perpetrator of a nearly identical crime. He hijacked a jet, demanded cash and parachutes, and jumped out the back. He was caught quickly that time, convicted, and later died in a shootout with FBI agents in 1974. For decades, he was considered a strong Cooper suspect, but was officially ruled out, in part because he didn't quite match the physical descriptions and because much of the FBI's attention had moved on. Then, in 2022, a retired pilot and skydiving expert named Dan Grider, who runs a YouTube channel dedicated to aviation mysteries, made contact with McCoy's now-grown children, Shantae and Rick III. And they told him something extraordinary. They had always believed their father was D.B. Cooper, and after their mother passed away, because they suspected she had helped him, they were finally ready to talk. On the family's old property in North Carolina, in an outbuilding, they had a parachute, a modified skydiving rig that Grider claimed matched the highly unusual equipment used in the Cooper jump so precisely he called it 1 in a billion. The parachute was handed over to the FBI, and here's what makes this genuinely live. The FBI took it. In 2023 and 2024, agents seized the parachute and other evidence and conducted a thorough search of the McCoy property. They reportedly asked to exhume McCoy's body to obtain a DNA sample. After more than 50 years, the case everyone thought was frozen solid had cracked open again, driven not by the FBI, but by a family, a YouTuber, and a rediscovered piece of cloth. Now, in the interest of honesty, this is where I have to pump the brakes, because a good story is not the same as a solved one. The FBI, characteristically, has said almost nothing. In late 2025, after roughly 2 years of forensic testing, they quietly returned the parachute to McCoy's son, without a public explanation of what, if anything, they found. They have not confirmed the parachute is connected to the hijacking. They have not ruled it out either. That silence has fueled 100 new theories, and veteran Cooper researchers urge real caution. McCoy's physical description never cleanly matched the eyewitness sketches. The DNA evidence from Cooper's tie has always been messy and partial, possibly contaminated over decades of handling, making a clean, conclusive match extremely difficult even if they exhume the body. A 1 in a billion parachute is a compelling phrase, but a phrase is not a fingerprint. So we sit, right now, in a genuinely rare place for a story this old, at a live cliffhanger. The strongest circumstantial case in the history of the mystery has collided with an FBI that isn't talking and forensic evidence that may be too degraded to ever deliver a clean verdict. Now step back, because the D.B. Cooper case is really about something bigger than one man and one parachute. Notice what actually happened here. For 45 years, this case sat officially dormant. What reopened it wasn't a new crime or a fresh body. It was people going back to old evidence with new eyes and old witnesses finally deciding to speak. A family kept a secret for half a century. A retired pilot spent 20 years chasing a hunch. A boy found money on a riverbank. The break didn't come from the top down, from the FBI's vast machinery. It came from the edges, from the people the official story had overlooked. That's the quiet truth running underneath almost every enduring mystery. The version that gets written down, the official file, the closed case, is not always the final word. Sometimes the real answer is sitting in a shed in North Carolina, or buried in a riverbank, or locked inside a family that isn't ready to talk yet. The case gets called unsolved not always because the answer doesn't exist, but because no one has yet connected the person who knows to the person asking. And there's something genuinely human in why we can't let this one go. D.B. Cooper is a blank space in the shape of a man. We know what he did, down to the drink he ordered and the flaps setting he demanded, but we do not know who he was. And a blank space like that is irresistible because we get to fill it. The mastermind, the desperate father, the doomed jumper freezing in the dark. Everyone who tells the Cooper story is really telling you a little about what they believe a person is capable of. So somewhere out there, the truth still exists. Maybe it's stitched in a parachute in an evidence locker. Maybe it's written in a strand of degraded DNA that may never quite resolve. Maybe it went into the cold Washington ground on a rainy night in 1971 and will stay there forever. A man in a business suit stepped off the back of a plane into a storm and became a question that 50 years of investigation couldn't answer. And the strangest part isn't that he jumped. It's that after all this time, we may finally be about to learn his name, and we're all still holding our breath, waiting to see if the sky gives him back.